Well, welcome to SPED Homeschool Conversations. Thank you for joining us here live on our Facebook group and also our Facebook page, I'm sorry. And for those of you who are joining us on this recorded session, either on Facebook, on YouTube, or on our podcast. And tonight, our very special guest is Kim Kautzer. I hope I said that right. She is the creative director for WriteShop. Welcome, Kim.
Thank you. I'm so glad to be here.
I'm so glad to have you here, and thank you for being willing to talk to us about writing strategies for children who struggle and have special needs. As we're starting the school year, I think this is one of the subjects that parents have the most anxiety about, and oftentimes they start out the year with a lot of hesitation in this area, and if it doesn't work, it's probably the first thing to get thrown out and put on the back burner. So we want them to start their year out right, with some right answers and from the experience that you have to share, which you have a lot of. So I'd just like you to start out by talking a little bit about that experience, and then we're going to go into maybe just some ways that special needs and struggling learners most struggle with writing and how that looks. So I'll just let you kind of dive into that however you would like.
Great, thank you. Well, I homeschooled for 15 years, and my girls were my oldest two, and I brought them home when they were going into 5th and 2nd grade. And they were already doing really well in the school system, and that academics and teachers wasn't the problem. We just decided that bringing them home was going to be the best for our family. Mm. And they were so easy to teach, and I could sit them down with their materials, their books, whatever, and they would just run with it. And they readings, they were strong writers. They were, even at 7, they had both been very able to just do their schoolwork without any issues at all. So I kind of set the bar for what schooling was like for our family for a few years, and then our son came of the school age, and everything kind of went south, and all my pat on your back ideas of how great a teacher I was and how wonderful and easy homeschooling was all kind of, took a tank dive into, he was a good boy, but he was busy and fidgety, and he could spend hours assembling a complicated Lego creation, but he would drop a pencil 500 times a day.
Wow.
I couldn't leave a thing on the breakfast table after, if we were sitting down with our homework to start the day. His hand would start creeping across the table and find the cereal spoon and start beating it. All the while, his eyes are on the paper that we're talking about. So he's mindlessly banging his spoon over here, and then the legs wrap around the chair, and the chair starts jumping. And so I realized I had a different learner on my hands. This was the early 90s, and we didn't have much in the way of internet. Right. We didn't have much in the way of understanding of what special needs were. Right. He could spin a yarn and tell stories that were fascinating and interesting, and he was really good at remembering facts if I read to him, but he was really slow to pick up on reading and writing. So I just had to keep starting and stopping, starting and stopping. And I'm sure you know how that goes.
Exactly, yes, I do.
And he was about 7 when he finally started to get the hang of decoding and reading. But he wasn't reading chapter books, and I'm talking about simple ones, till he was closer to 11. So he was entering 6th grade, and he had the vocabulary of a much, much older person, but he had the reading and writing skills of a very young child.
Right. Plus, and isn't that more typical for boys in general anyways?
I think so. And it's really funny because when moms come to me at a homeschooling convention and they say, I'm looking for a writing program, I say, okay, how old is your child? 7 or 10 or whatever they say. And before I even ask, do you have a son or a daughter? I can tell by the look on their face that it's a boy. And about 85% of the time, their struggling writer is a boy. But then Ben also had physical issues that complicated. So he would develop this intense arm and shoulder tension when he was writing. And his grip was so strong on his pencil that his arm would hurt and his hand would hurt and his hand would cramp. And he ended up with illegible writing, horrible spelling. His words ran together like, wet ink. It was really rough to kind of put a finger on it. And so we took him to somebody in our area who was doing therapy with homeschool students. And she diagnosed him with something called kinesthetic deficit disorder, which I've come to find out doesn't exist.
I was going to say, I've never heard of that one before.
Had named, she maybe had her own names that she had developed for certain things that she was treating. And this was what she called it. And basically just manifested with some of the things that I've told you about, but he was unaware of his extremities. He just had no idea that he had arms and legs and that they did things apart from him when he was focused on something else. And this created, obviously, learning challenges for us. Plus, he showed symptoms of dysgraphia. He had an overall aversion to anything that had to do with writing. And so it was just finding that the conventional methods that worked with his sisters were not working with him. So something wasn't clicking. He was loaded with ideas, but he couldn't manage to transfer those thoughts to paper. And that is where you moms, dads who are listening, this is pretty much what you're going to be dealing with, no matter whether you have a child who has a diagnosed learning issue, or whether they are students who just are reluctant to write. You're going to be faced with a lot of similarities to the things I'm going to be talking about.
And that's a good point to let parents know, too, is you don't have to have a child who has a diagnosed special need to have a child that struggles with any subject, really. They just hit those plateaus or they hit a blockage. And I know we're going to talk a lot about tonight are ways to get beyond some of those things that across the board for just about every child, they're going to hit these places for writing. Some of them hit them so quick and go over themselves that we don't see them, like you did with your daughters. But there's others who they just stop dead in their tracks when they hit those things. And we just we have to know how to get them beyond that. And I'm so glad that you do that. It
is we freeze as parents, and if we don't have resources, and life is busy with so many other things, and we've got a baby and a toddler and a child who needs our constant attention for schooling, and we need to run a house and be a wife, and how does that all happen? It's really tough. And so it's easy to give up on some of these things, and then you end up with a high schooler who can't write, and you're panicked by guilt because that blank page is always teasing you.
Right, exactly. Yeah, so and you can't give into that guilt.
I did find a resource and it's still in print, that gave me a lot of encouragement when I was walking that path with Ben. And I'm sure that you have heard of the late Dr. Raymond Moore. I'm sure that you have seen his writings, but he had a book called Better Late Than Early. And that was really my lifeline, because the book helps you to understand that your kids can and usually will catch it when they get mature enough for it to all make sense. And that happened to Ben. So I stopped worrying that at 10, he still wasn't reading like his sisters or like his friends. I just gave it up and realized that he's going to get there. And he did. It was hard. It was really hard. And I had to learn a lot of strategies. I kind of taught myself strategies that I see now are just really solid. And so I love to share those things. But anyway, in the long run, I like to share with parents that this wisdom that I got from another mom, and she says, do what you can when you can, and don't beat yourself up for what you cannot.
Yeah.
So my
because we
story
let fear drive us otherwise, and fear never leads us in the right direction. Absolutely.
So fast forward now, Ben is in his early 30s, and he didn't stagnate as an 11 or 12-year-old boy who couldn't write or read very well.
That's awesome.
He, 3 years ago, got a PhD in theology. Well, as you can only imagine, that requires tons and tons of writing. And he had to do writing all through college. It all just kind of came together for him in the middle of high school. And there were a lot of factors that were contributing. It was the therapy we did, I'm sure, when he was younger. There were some different things that we did along the way. He was involved in speech and debate, which helped him to learn how to think on his feet and do research. And there's just lots of factors that played in. And I think he just outgrew some. I think I know you can outgrow dysgraphia. And I don't know that everybody does, but I think looking back, he probably had some processing issues, and he had sensory issues, and he probably had some dysgraphic struggles. So anyway, now he lives in England, so we get to go visit. That's where two youngest grandchildren are there. We have 9 grandkids. The 2 littlest ones live there, so it's kind of fun to get a chance to go.
Well, I just want to let our viewers know, and I know there's lots of comments. I'm going to get to those in a second, but if you have questions for Kim as we're going along, make sure you put those in the feed also, because we'll be able to read those and put those up. Radana, thank you for suggesting our show. And also, Douglas says, Hi, great to see you. I'll be teaching my 15-year-old for the first time with WriteShop Book D.
Hi, Olga.
And then Betsy says, starting WriteShop this year with my 4th and 5th graders. And then Amy said that she's using the first book with her 1st grader who has
Oh, that's really
ASD.
exciting. Well, one of the things I just kind of throw in as a little aside is that when my friend Debbie and I wrote the older versions, WriteShop I and II, we were teaching a homeschool co-op class with our boys. They were 12. And so we were what we started out with didn't work. And we ended up, because we were committed to this class, of writing our own material week by week and running to the printer at 6 a.m. I had a key to the coffee shop. And we just found that what worked for reluctant writers also works for kids with special needs. And so that's really what I want to share tonight. And I want to start out just kind of talking about why the process of writing is so complex.
Yeah, that would be a good way to start.
And, we often wonder, what's the big deal? We just pick up a pen and we write. But we don't understand that there's so much involved in getting that idea out of our heads and onto paper. It has to go through all this neurological rigmarole in order to make the thought, has to make its way down the arm, to the hand, to the writing utensil, and get onto the paper in a coherent way. The child has to be able to hold the pencil and form words. They have to know how to string words together in a way that makes sense. They have to be able to hold the information in their head long enough to get it down on paper. And this is probably what a lot of you parents have heard. And I'm sure if I asked for a hands up, you would hear the same thing. Okay, Ben, so we've talked about 4 different adjectives that would be really good to use in front of this noun. Which one do you want to use in this sentence? Which one is shortest to spell?
Exactly.
And so children who are left to their own devices and they struggle to write, whether they have special needs or just reluctance, are going to put the least amount of information on paper. They may have loads of good ideas in their head, but it's so hard for them to get it down on paper that's where they get stuck. So let's just kind of jump in and talk a little bit about what special needs and writing look like, because there are really some specific things that parents, if that's okay. some of the things that parents are actually looking at. And I do want to mention up front that I'm not a specialist. I am a mom who has learned some things over the years that have really worked. I've developed writing materials and curriculum that works, and it works for kids with special needs as well as children who have no struggles with learning at all.
You got some great testimonies on your website of parents.
Thank you.
All different diagnoses and struggles, but they all say, you know what, this really works. And so that's a testimony to what you're doing.
So I just want you to not feel like as moms or dads that you're making too much of this and that you should get over it or get a grip, or that your kids should get a grip, because it's not that simple. And studies have shown that homeschooling a special needs child is going to give them gains that they will not get in a classroom. So, even we've all heard of Thomas Edison and his, he didn't last very long in the public system, and his mother brought him home from school, and then she instilled in him a love and a purpose for learning. And look where he is. I mean, I'm sitting here in the kitchen with lights on, and I'm talking in a computer with all of that can harken back to a man like Thomas Edison.
Exactly.
So to continually believe that you are the best person to teach your special needs child. So there are different learning challenges that I want to kind of give a quick overview on, and that would be ADHD, dysgraphia, dyslexia, and autism that's not very severe. Just I'm going to speak to the middle of the road learning struggles, not to the very severe, because I don't have expertise in that area. But when you look at ADHD, and I would imagine that there are a number of you whose kids either have been diagnosed or who you see these activities, the distractibility, the disorganization, carelessness in their errors, trouble finishing their work, just avoiding writing at any cost. These are the symptoms that affect writing in a child with ADHD. Now, if you have a child who has dysgraphia, there will be similarities to all of these. But with dysgraphia, they're going to have I talk with my hands, so
I know.
It might fly out of my ears at any point. Anyway, so a dysgraphic child will have poor handwriting. The line spacing and word spacing will be, just not consistent, really crowded, or it's just hard to read. A death grip on their pencil, avoiding writing, and just in general, trouble getting ideas onto paper, because it's so hard to do the writing that the ideas just vanish before they have a chance to get anything written.
Right. Yeah, so they may have really good ideas up here, but they just don't translate here.
Yes, and I think that's true with many children.
I agree.
The dyslexic child is also going to have avoidance, because it's just a work of great labor to write. Their sentence structure is often poor. They have line spacing and word spacing issues. The dyslexic child has another problem, and that is they have trouble proofreading their own work. So they appear careless when they truly can't see their mistakes. So that is something where working together with your child can be really helpful.
Yeah.
And then finally, the high functioning child with autism. This child can have topical issues. They are so black and white that they can have trouble with abstract topics. And so, you might think, oh, this is just a really fun topic that he should be able to write about, and it just makes no sense to him in his black and white world. He can also struggle with memory and retention issues. And there's a big disconnect, like there was with Ben, although Ben isn't dealing with autism, but a disconnect between their ability to speak and their ability to write. They can speak volumes in mature vocabulary, but can't get those words down on paper.
Right. And it's very precise, and it's not detail oriented. When they talk, you'll get all the details.
You will, about every aspect of it. And it's really funny because different moms will come and talk to me at the convention, or I'll do a workshop or something, and they'll be sharing. I said, what is your kids, what is the one thing that they are just zoomed in on right now? Mm-hmm. And I've gotten everything from Pokemon to potatoes. I kid you not. There was a mom at my last workshop in Arizona whose child was absolutely obsessed with potatoes right now.
Oh, wow.
And so it's just where you want to kind of let them write. And then also this child, the high functioning child with autism, is going to be more than any of the others, a perfectionist. Mm-hmm. And perfectionist can bog down any student. But
writing, it really does. It just squashes that creativity.
Yes. And so what happens with all of these kids is they're easily overwhelmed and they're easily discouraged by their lack of success, because what they think in their head is not showing up on their paper, and they feel like failures. And that's really, really hard for them. Some of these issues, like dysgraphia, are neurological. Some of them are, physiological. You've got kids who just have, they have physical issues of pencil grip and all that stuff. And so it's just, it's just hard.
Right.
So there are going to be things that parents can do. And I don't know if you want me to just kind of share some of these ideas, or if you want to take some questions first, or how would you like to?
If you have any questions, you can put them in.
I'm just thinking if I share some things, and maybe it'll answer a question before it gets asked.
Right. Yeah, definitely. We just have one more comment that was from Amy. She said, my son can tell long, detailed stories, but struggles to write. I love WriteShop because it works with the strengths and storytelling until the mechanics of writing can further develop. And really, that's what it's all about, is getting those stories,
Absolutely.
And not squashing it with the technical parts of the writing, which, I'm hearing you say over and over again.
Yeah. So your child is living in a world that is increasingly busy and loud and distracting and noisy. And that is exacerbated by technology and the internet and smart devices. And it's becoming more and more so. And so it's really imperative when you're working with children who have special needs to help them find a work zone that's going to be distraction free, where they've got, you can kind of separate them and isolate them from their devices and the things that are keeping them, pulling them away. Some place that's quiet, that's well lit. And then, you might want to provide a little movement break for them before they start writing. You always want to make sure that as a parent, you are working closely with your child, that writing is a partnership. It's not, even for really articulate and motivated kids, writing is not particularly intuitive and natural. The best writers have had training, and they have learned from modeling. And so don't feel like this is some, if you've got to give your child independent study, this is not the subject to do that. So Peggy's nodding her head.
I agree so much. Yes, I know. I actually recruited my 19-year-old to work with my 13-year-old this year, because he was more interested in the writing than I was. And I said, oh, good. You discuss it with your sister, because when you write something, you don't think about how someone else would perceive it. You're so busy thinking it in your head that when you talk it out with someone else, and that's, a great way for a parent to just have a good discussion. And it doesn't have to be critical of what your child's writing, but it's definitely helps them to think beyond how they perceive it.
Absolutely. Yes, I couldn't agree more. So I know that at this point in a session, I would be champing at the bit and saying, okay, give me tools. Tell me what I can do. How do I make this better? So let's talk about that and some of the different things that you can do. And one of the first things I like to tell parents is your children need boundaries. They need specific parameters for an assignment. So let's say that you have a helicopter and you strap your child onto some leash at the end of the helicopter, and you pilot him over the middle of the ocean, and you're getting ready to drop him in. And you say, okay, to drop you in, I want you to swim for shore. Bye. And then you fly away, and he's in the middle of the ocean. Mm-hmm. Well, he doesn't know that there might be an island a half a mile away because he can't see it. So what you have done is you've created a situation where he doesn't know where he has to go, how far he has to go, what he has to do to get there, and how long it's going to take him. And this is very much like a writing assignment that we think kids should love. And that is, write about anything you want.
Oh gosh, yes.
You have just given your poor child the death knell.
Yeah, so, panic sets in.
he needs clear assignments. He needs directions. He needs assignments that are short. Don't expect your kids, especially if you're still in the developmental period where you're trying to get them to write sentences and paragraphs. Don't expect really long compositions out of them. It's nice to be able to say to them, I want you to write one paragraph. I want it to be 5 to 7 sentences long. And then you give them some specifics about it. Maybe it's the topic that they're going to write about, but let them choose the specific subject. So if the topic, the general subject matter is describing an object, don't just say, I want you to describe an object. You say, okay, let's pick something that you love, that you really want to describe, something you can pick up and hold.
Right.
Okay, let's start there. Now, I want you to describe things about its shape, its texture, its color. Does it have a smell? Does it make a sound? What does it feel like when you touch it? What does it look like to your eyes? Does it have special features? And so you're
prompting with questions.
Yes. And so it depends on the child. These things could be written down in form of a graphic organizer or a worksheet, or you could just talk about these things ahead of time for a child who may be fine having those parameters. But you definitely want to give them some special limits. So, for example, you have a child who's very black and white. We'll talk about our little child with autism who might just be so black and white. And you would say, they don't know what the assignment is asking. And so you could say, I want you to write 2 sentences on the topic of Call of the Wild. So they might say, Call of the Wild is a book. Call of the Wild has 260 pages. So in their mind, they have fulfilled the assignment.
Exactly.
Because, yes. And so if you were to say this and say, okay, write 2 sentences that describe the plot of Call of the Wild, or write a sentence, that describes the setting in this chapter, whatever. So it gives them something that's much more specific.
Right.
And so those are the things that are really important there. Another way to help your kids to be focused is to give them bite-sized assignments. So when you tell a student that they are to write a 2-paragraph report, and you've already talked about the topic, whatever, but you say, okay, it just needs to be 2 paragraphs. You've given them all the parameters. You've done everything you were supposed to do. But now you tell him that it's due on Friday. So he's got 4 or 5 days to work on this. Many children, regardless of their special needs or whatever, they can just be procrastinators. They just don't have the skills. They are putting everything aside till the last minute.
Right.
Instead, with a child who struggles, a reluctant writer, a special needs writer, break it up into steps. So writing is a bunch of steps. You have pre-writing, which is where you talk about what you want to write. You maybe do some activities that teach a writing skill that they can use in that lesson.
Exactly.
You want them to be able to brainstorm and plan their story out using some kind of a graphic organizer. It can be something that's visual, that has boxes and sections and sequencing, or that has mind mapping, anything that helps them to visually see. So brainstorming is super important, helping them get the ideas out and begin the rough organization.
Right, because I think we think writing is such a linear process when it really is not. It is so much about building that structure ahead of time before you even get to the paper and starting to write and putting it into a linear structure.
Well, thank you for saying that. That is really true. Yes, writing it's more global. And it involves our senses, and it involves our intellect and our physical ability. And so there are lots of things that are in play here. Right. So one of the things that that you can also do as you're going through the stages of the writing process, you go pre-writing and brainstorming, then you've got the rough draft, you've got just that first opportunity to get things out on paper, not worry about perfection.
Right.
As a matter of fact,
spelling issues or, all those things.
He said, I like that they call it a sloppy copy, Mom, because it means that if I'm going to follow directions, I have to be sloppy the first time. I can't be funny. And the perfectionist. And so even in his perfectionism and his need to be a rule follower, he loved that he didn't have to be perfect on the first time.
That's a very good tip for all you parents who have kids on the autism spectrum, because they are perfectionists. And yes, if they're told they can be sloppy, then it's a huge relief because they will hold themselves to the highest standard you give them or their highest standard.
That's right. And they often will set that for themselves. Yep. So then we've got editing and we've got revising, and those are also parts of the writing process so that you get to a final draft. When you're teaching writing to special needs children, it's important to include and consider all their learning styles. So are they a visual learner? Are they an auditory learner? Are they tactile? Are they kinesthetic and physical? Are they verbal? Are they logical? So finding materials to help you teach writing, and that's one of the things I think that some of the parents are going to be agreeing that they're finding for their students is that there's enough in there to appeal to different learning types
Amy states this, which is so in line with what you just said, and she wrote this even before you started, but she said, personally, I don't like to brainstorm on paper, but enjoy planning out what I write as I was doing something active. So there we have an active learner who, herself realizes that this is how I brainstorm is when I do things. And if you
partner with a parent, then if you're that kind of a child, when you like to just think out loud, this was my son, very much my son. He would, even when he was in the middle of his PhD, he would call me sometimes and talk things out, but I'm a listener because at this point, I have no clue what he's writing about. It's way too cerebral for me. And I would just listen and I would, yes, okay, that makes sense. Yeah. And at the end, he would thank me for helping him organize his thoughts. And I hadn't done a thing, but just exactly what Amy was saying. And so, but with a child like that, if you're teaching a younger child, you can be your child's scribe and you can be writing the ideas for them as they do their brain dump.
Exactly. Yeah.
Several times. I cannot tell you how important that is to take on that role in your child's writing experience, to be their scribe and not worry about whether you're handicapping them or shortchanging them.
Yeah,
because
we have an article, actually, Amy wrote it about, am I cheating by helping my child in those ways? And no, it's not cheating by helping your child like that, because you have to get them, like we were talking about at the very beginning, those bumps. You have to get them past those bumps. And once they get over those little bumps, then they can tackle the bigger stuff more easily because you've helped them a little bit, and so it's definitely, you're not carrying the full load for them. You're not making up the story too. You're just.
And I was thinking, it just it's like you go through life doing your thing, and then you get an epiphany at some point along the way. And this has been one of the things that came to me just this last year. People like Socrates or Aristotle, the Apostle Paul, they didn't do their own writing. They had scribes.
Exactly.
And yet the book of Romans is not ascribed to Tertius. It's ascribed to Paul, even though Tertius was the person who said, I'm writing this with my own hand.
Exactly.
It was being, there I go with my crazy hands. It was it's Paul's work, Paul's words. Our words were spoken and written down, and the ideas are what's behind much more than the actual script.
So good. So, yes. Yeah.
So parents,
I think we get so stuck in our society now is so much about individualism, and we forget, God made us to function together too, but it's not a handicap to need other people. We need other people anyways. And so teach your child how to ask for the help they need, because that teaches them to advocate too later on in their life.
That's right.
When they are going to need to ask for that help, and they're not going to feel guilty about doing that either.
And then also, I think it's a give and take. You move forward a few steps, you back up a few steps. You give your child more independence in writing, and then you see, parents ask me all the time, how do I know when I need to help with the writing? It's like, when your child starts to melt down, when you see frustration mounting, that is your clue that they need some assistance. Get that great thought out of your head and feel successful and good about it. I'm here for you.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, so don't hesitate to do that with your kids. It's a great tool as parents. And then if you've got your visual learners, you're going to find that they will be attracted to graphic organizers and checklists and written instructions, where your auditory learner is going to be much more likely to be like an Amy and want to express things orally. They like to listen to things. They like, they're going to be podcasts and word games and verbal instructions and writing prompts that are oral are going to be right up their alley. And then your tactile and kinesthetic learners are going to like things that they can manipulate and touch. If you're describing something, if it's something they can pick up and touch, you're describing a food, something they can taste and describe as they eat it, so that they can write about the experience that they're having during this process. Writing about a place and going and visiting this place with your notebook or your recording device, so your speech to text, where they can be looking at the animals at the zoo and describing them verbally. And somehow,
so like a reporter, or like a food critic, those types of things are awesome for kids like that, because you get them out in the real world, and then they're writing about their experiences as they're there. And you can even give them a camera so that they can take pictures with it. Yes,
and so you're appealing to this whole multi-sensory approach for your kids. So I talked a bit about graphic organizers, and I cannot stress enough how helpful these are for your special needs learners. They help them make a plan. They remind them of where their story is going. You can appeal to different learning styles in the kind of graphic organizer that you use, and so it's going to reduce their stress.
Right, and if they have a checklist, then they know I didn't miss anything. I did that, I checked those things, and I got to the bottom, and okay, I think I did it all. Because writing can be, like you said, it's so oblivious about and so for a very concrete thinker, which, kids, especially on the autism spectrum, are so concrete, those checklists are very important, because it reduces their stress a lot.
Yes, and I really recommend checklists for for their editing. And some graphic organizers have checklists like, like I mentioned earlier, what does it look like? What color is it? What does it smell like? That you can have a list of those things. And so some graphic organizers are going to be a lot more visual. They'll be divided into boxes, like 9 grids, where you'll have in the first grid, it will say the first line is the beginning, the second line is the middle, and the last line is the end. So what happens at the beginning of your story, and what three things happen at the beginning, what three things happen in the middle and at the end, so they can break it down and see the flow. What is the problem and what is the solution, depending on what kind of a writing assignment it is.
Exactly.
But having things that are visual for them are going to really help. So one idea that you can use with children of pretty much any age is to take a paper plate and divide it into 6 sections, like a pie. And then this would be your story ingredients. And each section would have a different, like you have the who, the what, the when, the where, the why, and the how. And the who, of course, will be the characters. The what can be the problem. The when is the time and place. The time. The where is the place. The why could be and the how could be part of the solution. So anyway, you've got these things that it's just a visual, so it directs your child as they're writing. So, just things like that are going to be helpful to them. Also for your kids, repetition and practice is critical when they are doing their writing. And I'm sure, Peggy, that you have seen this in your experience in any subject.
In any subject, yes. And because the more you do something, the more you learn. And then, of course, the more you teach something, the more you learn even more. Yes. And so to be able to get your child, with other kids, to be able to express back and forth, which I'm sure, your son learned a lot with speech and debate.
Yes.
When you're getting into those small group settings that are safe, it's even maybe if it's just one friend, to be able to share back and forth, but to practice and kind of see what you've done from someone else's perspective. And, but yeah, definitely, just practice makes perfect. And, the more you do it, I think somebody even said to me, how can you blog? Well, I was the worst writer in high school. I will just admit that. I always left out gaps. I think dyslexic. I've never had a struggle reading, but I taught myself to read when I was very young. So probably have issues with dyslexia, but just never manifested in a way that I struggled with it. But I miss so much of my writing. I use Grammarly to correct my grammar because I miss words that I don't even see, like you said. But I've taught myself tricks that work for me. And, I've seen that with my kids too, is that as you practice more, you internalize those tricks.
Yes.
And they just become natural to help
your own compensations. And I think that's really important. And with the repetition and practice, I think that we start to see that this is the key for them to begin to understand their concepts. It builds on earlier skills. The practice produces results. So something that you introduce, and this is something that I've discovered in other, when I was homeschooling, there wasn't much out there. There were several different writing programs that I was using at the time that I was trying to make work, but they didn't. And one of the things that I discovered years later, why I struggled with those, is there wasn't this repetition. You would learn a concept in a lesson, and then the next lesson would not revisit that. And so it might say, let's, work on avoiding passive writing. And they would talk all about how to get rid of those to be verbs. And then the very next lesson, the example was riddled with to be verbs, and there was no discussion of passive writing again. So the things you teach at the beginning may not stick right away, just like Peggy was saying, but over time, if you keep reintroducing and using those and requiring them in writing assignments, as we do in WriteShop, we just revisit those things so that they become intuitive. Yeah, and that's so important, is that the student eventually, he doesn't need your prompts anymore. That they just internalize those prompts, and they will say those in their head to themselves after a while. But it's what is it? You're supposed to be able to do something like 21 times before you build a habit, and you have to do it that exact same way 21 times. So working with your student and building in those
clues or those cues for them is going to take a long time. It's not going to happen, like you said, in 1 or 2 lessons. It has to happen,
Absolutely. Yes,
for
right.
years.
And you want to be able to see those things transfer into other subjects. And I remember when I was teaching writing classes, I had one little girl come to me one time and she said, Mrs. Kautzer, all these to-be words. She said, now I'm counting to-be words in my history writing. And it just made me laugh because she was realizing that it was becoming part of her grid.
Right. Yeah.
And she was using that in other areas of her schooling. And she was making a big deal of it in fun, but really saying to me, this is making sense.
Right. Well, and there's so much crossover between the gaps that our kids have in reading, in writing, and even in math, because we have word problems. And if we can't decipher those words and rebuild the sentence structures, even within math, because basically you take a math problem that's written out in words and you translate it into the symbols. Yes. But that's writing. And so if your child is at a gap in one spot, you're going to create gaps in other areas, but you're also going to heal them as you're working on all these things together. So, so don't feel like, well, writing isn't, that important. Well, yes, it is.
And it has practicality for all aspects of life. And that's one thing we really want our kids to be strong in. And part of that comes as they get older and they need to learn how to be more accountable for their own writing and the improvement of their writing. So this brings us to the next thing that I want to talk about, and that is exactly what you mentioned earlier, and that's having a checklist. When you give your kids an editing checklist, it helps them to mark their progress and to monitor the completion of the steps. So the checklist can be super simple when they're in elementary school and become more complex as they get older. I don't even use a checklist when I'm doing editing with a kindergarten, first, second grader. You just sit side by side with them and you say, okay, let's look at our little story. Do you have a beginning, middle, and end? Show me. You talk about it. Did we start every sentence with a capital letter? Point to them. Point to the periods of the sentences. And that's really pretty much all you might want to do, except maybe to say, let's find one weak word that you'd like to make stronger, or circle 2 words that you think you might need to check their spelling on. You don't have to find every mistake, and you don't want to, especially when they're little and they're just getting started, or when you're finally getting serious with a struggling or learning challenged child. You don't want to upend them with their very first writing assignment by red penciling every mistake they make.
Exactly.
So you do editing together with them at first. You give them some self-editing materials, and WriteShop has lots of these, but many other writing programs include checklists. You just want to make sure that they have something to look at, whether it includes a list of things like capitalized first letters, capitalized proper nouns, punctuation at the end. It could be a lot of things that are just plain mechanical. Right. And then including things like chose strong words instead of weak words, or wrote complete sentences. And they will, for some of these things, they're very, very objective. They can find, or should be able to find. But some children with special needs, especially the ones I talked about, the dysgraphic child, can't see those things. Even if he's looking for them, he can't see them. And he's going to need some help learning to identify them. And so that's why working together is really good, and giving lots of positive feedback in the beginning before you even sit down to discuss a single error. Finding something they did well and commenting on it. Wow, I really love this adjective that you chose here. It is so vivid and wonderful. Or I want to point out, this sentence, you wrote this sentence with perfect capitalization and spelling and ending punctuation. And good job, well done. Or even if the spelling was atrocious, you can bless their capitalization and ending punctuation, or just whatever one thing that you can point out that they did well is really, really important. And then
That's so important in general.
Their checklists will become more complex, and you'll have much more that you can do with them. And as you're editing with kids, especially if you have a visual or a tactile child, use colored pencils. Have them underline weak words with one color. Have them circle punctuation errors with another, things that you're working on together, and then it just kind of makes a visual connection for them, and it provides a focus for their revising. So that's something else that you can do.
And if you have certain colors that you always designate for those, they'll be able to pick them out.
Yes, and quicker. We do that in WriteShop I and II, where they always use red for their to-be words. They always circle their to-be words in red. And so that becomes a signal for them.
Right. Yeah.
So they can just be really helpful for them in many different ways. Using word banks can help children who are distractible and have spelling issues. You can find word banks and print them off the internet, but you can also make your own, especially if your child is writing about something that's a topic specific. So if he's writing a short report on photosynthesis or on volcanoes or on George Washington, then you can make a portable word bank. And I wish I had brought one in with me, but basically take a file folder, manila file folder. And on the front of the file folder, so here's a piece of paper. So on the front of the file folder, you would write volcanoes or words about volcanoes, and on the tab. And then inside the folder, you would just make a list of words. So it could, you know, magma, eruption, Hawaii, the Pacific Rim, or whatever words that have to do with volcanoes and their environment. And then when your child is writing, not only are the words there, but also the spellings. And that it really helps them to feel more confident about putting those words down on paper, and it helps them to make better word choices. But back to the scribing that I was talking about earlier, one thing you can do with your kids is if you scribe for them as they dictate, even working off a word bank, that's still part of that process. Then they can copy that, or they can type it out, and then they can edit and work on revising that, the revision. So now I'm going to throw in my second freebie. So my first one was let your child dictate to you. This one is don't edit the paper that they poured their blood, sweat, and tears into. Make a photocopy if it's handwritten, or print a fresh copy if they typed it out, and let them edit. They have so much personal investment, and especially if it was really laborious for them to get those words out. You don't want to suddenly decide to mark it all up. So that's defeating. That would be my second freebie for you.
Say, we have a question here. It's a comment, and it says, I have one with ADHD, talk about long stories. He loves reading and struggles putting paragraphs together, one with Asperger's and low tone, muscle tone, so writing is not easy for him. I know you had some ideas for what parents can do for children who have a hard time gripping.
Yes, and so I'm going to talk about some this pencil grip ideas. And actually, let me just jump into that, because the next thing is just the whole area of physical challenges. And so there are some alternative writing methods, some different things that you can do. I talked about dictation. One thing you can do is share the pencil with a child who has some ability to write, or is confident writing certain words, and then you write whatever is hard for your child. And then, of course, keyboarding skills, and letting them find a speech-to-text software that works, whether it's Dragon, Naturally Speaking, whether it's a voice recorder, something that they can use that will be helpful to them. And then here are the special pencils and grips that I was mentioning to you earlier. So there's the ErgoSoft pen again, and I gave links.
I've got some of these, and so I can actually share them on. Let's see, the pen again is this one right here.
Yes.
Let me see if I'm going to pull this up to, hopefully, there we go. So that's what that looks like.
These all have different merits and different, you need to have your child try different ones. This is one of those times where you just have to kind of either borrow from somebody who's got them or just invest and know that not all of these are going to be effective, but when you find the one that works for your child, it's like gold.
That's a very good point, because there's a lot of them out there and they're not all going to work for every child.
So my screen is small, so I can't tell if you've got the link there, but if you've got links for people to share them, that would be great. So the pen again is one. Then there's the ring pen, and that one, did I mention that one to you?
Nope, it's the Dex Tech.
So that I think, is that, so I'm looking, I wrote those down in a different place, and I gave you the links because they weren't always the name of the company. So the Easy Grip, was that the Dex?
The Dex Tech was the Easy Grip.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah, and so that one is, that's a great one for kids who have struggle actually, holding on to the pencil itself. And then, so there's another option for them. And then the pencil grip is another one I think I gave you. And
that's this one right here.
Yes, and so there were several different options that they had. They had fingertip ones, and then a couple of others that give you different options. And so
there's even ones where you put your fingers in, it looks like. And so they have quite a few different options.
Yes, and again, just looking for something that's going to work for you. And some of these, you can go to the actual websites. Others, you can go to Amazon and check out. I just gave Peggy the websites directly, but Amazon.
And I can copy and paste those in for everyone.
And then just you talked about in the question about how to string paragraphs together. Your child has trouble with ideas, and I think for all learners, it's teaching them that line builds upon line, and so starting with the structure of a sentence and making sure that they can build a good sentence. So you can, if their sentence is really disjointed and it's really awkward in its structure, one of the things you can do is reduce it to its two basic elements of subject and verb. And so if the writing is really convoluted and really not making sense and the structure is just awkward, narrow it down to just the two main things. So it could be dog ran, and everything, it could be this long hairy sentence, but you want to isolate it down to dog ran. Okay, then you start asking questions. Where did your dog run? And then he'll say, well, he ran, in the sentence, the dog ran maybe to get a bone, or ran in the backyard. And so then you say, okay, let's add that. So the dog ran in the backyard. So now we've got a sentence that's starting to make sense. Now we can add some describing words. What kind of dog? Let's make it more specific or more descriptive. Especially if they're talking about their own dog. My dog ran. So, what's your dog's name? Molly. Okay, then let's say Molly ran. And then in another sentence, we can use the word dog. And in another sentence, we could use the dog's breed. What's our dog's breed? Well, she's a poodle. Okay, then let's put that down and save it for another sentence. So we're not always saying Molly in every sentence. We're not always saying my dog. We're using different ways to describe her. So in this sentence, Molly ran in the backyard. And so what does Molly look like? Well, Molly is black. Okay, so what else can you tell me about her? Well, she's furry. Well, what do we want to say about her that describes how she's running? Maybe it's something about her speed. So, she ran fast. And maybe if you're working with an older child, you can say, let's put in a simile. What's a simile for fast if you've been working on that skill? When somebody runs fast, what do we say they run like? They run like the wind, or they run like, whatever. And so Molly ran in circles like the wind. Or so you just help them build a sentence from the ground up. Once they have written a series of sentences, and you can even do them like one here, one here, one here, one here. You don't put them together into a paragraph yet. You might cut the sentences apart and have your child move them around until the flow of the sentences makes sense. Then you might find we need to close up this paragraph with a closing, or we need to introduce this paragraph with a topic sentence. But you'll notice that after you've constructed good sentences and put them together, maybe we need a transition word to connect this. And of course, some of this will apply to older children who have already some understanding of sentence structure, because like in the mom who asked the question, I'm sorry, I forgot your name, but she was wanting to get an older child, a teen. So by that time, they should be structuring paragraphs and multiple paragraphs. So if you can write several good sentences, you can write a paragraph. If you can write a good paragraph, you can write several paragraphs, and then you can string them together and use transition words to connect. So then that paragraph can become 2 or 3 or 5, and pretty soon you have a short report.
Well, that's a great example of, you were talking about how to take those baby steps, or to break it down into steps. That it makes it so simple now that you've broken that process down, because I think parents can see this is how simple it really can be. All we need is a paper, pencil, and a scissors. And maybe just a poster board so we can fill in everything. But it really can be that you don't need to be high tech to get all those things onto paper and to make it.
And if you're typing it, you can print it and cut the type words into strips.
Yeah, definitely.
So I want to get to a few more questions if we have time, but
we are actually over our hour already.
Okay. Then
we definitely have to have you back.
Well, that would be great. I would love to be able to do that. And if you can just list the resources that I had given you for.
Yes. There's a couple other ones that Diane Kraft, definitely her Right Brain Learner items are really good. And then Homeschooling with Dyslexia too has some good resources also.
Marianne Sunderland is amazing, and she's got some great resources for kids who struggle with dyslexia. And then of course SPED.
Yeah, check out our website. We have actually Mary Mary Winfield wrote a whole series on writing and just different ways to move from, getting the right, just getting your kids to even do it with their finger on, different objects, make it very tactile, and moving all the way to letter formation. So kind of the younger years, for writing. Definitely that's stuff we have on our website at spedhomeschool.com also. But definitely check out Kim's curriculum too, WriteShop, and just writeshop.com. Is that correct? And sounds like a lot of people that were watching tonight are going to be using that program this year. So definitely, I know we talked about maybe you coming back and talking about gifted learners and 2E learners and some struggles that they have writing also. So it's like we said, you aren't just have special needs and you struggle with writing. I think it's generally across the board. I think more people struggle with writing than don't.
Yes.
So this has been a great topic.
Thank you for having me. And
Amy said thank you so much for the encouragement. Makes me feel confident I'm right on track. And Gina said thank you. So thank you all of you for joining us. I'll get that last link up on there. And just thanks again, Kim, for taking some time out of your evening. I know you had some time away from family tonight to join us, and so I thank you for that and that sacrifice, and just helping encourage our audience for this year ahead and all their writing endeavors.
Great. Happy to be here with you, and And you can always email me, kim@writeshop.com, if you have specific questions. We have some on our team who homeschool special needs kids, and if I have an answer, I can direct it to.
That's always great to have a community to bounce those off of. So, well, we want to thank Learning Disabilities Foundation of America for partially funding this broadcast, and for viewers like you who donate on our website at spedhomeschool.com. So make sure you check out those resources there, and we want to keep the conversation going all week long. So definitely make comments on our website, but also join our Facebook support group where we're keeping the conversation going day and night. And until we see you back here again next Tuesday night. And my guest next Tuesday is Heather Walton from A+ Education Solutions. And we're going to talk about reading, decoding fluency, and comprehension next week. So until then, we'll see you around on Facebook, but otherwise I'll see you here next Tuesday night. Have a good night, and bye.